Good evening. I think it's time to break the silence. Allow me to do that by introducing myself. I'm Peter Knox. I'm the director of the Baker Nord Center, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all here for the third Issa lecture. The Issa lecture was established in honor of William Lewis Chapin Issa to bring to campus distinguished experts in the fields related to environment and sustainability. And this evening, we're delighted to welcome Cynthia Willett, who's a professor in the Department of Philosophy at Emory University, where she's been on the faculty since 1996. Her research interests include moral philosophy, race and gender studies, and ethics and social theory. At Emory, she's been responsible for establishing the Institute for the History of Philosophy. And she's also an award-winning teacher. She's the author of numerous articles and reviews, and her book publications include Maternal Ethics and Other Slave Moralities, The Soul of Justice, Social Bonds and Racial Hubris, and Irony in the Age of Empire. Most recently, she's the author of Interspecies Ethics, published with Columbia University Press in 2014, a work which brings together classical philosophy, literature, psychology, animal studies, and a host of other disciplines, which will form some of the basis of her presentation for us tonight on interspecies ethics, meditations on cosmopolitan peace. Professor Willett has had an interesting experience here in Cleveland in the last several days. The sunshine, the warm weather, the buffets out on the lawn. So today, let's give her a warm welcome and thank her in advance for her presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for that lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me? No? Yeah. I should be wired, so hopefully there will be no problem. And thank you all for helping to make this event happen. It's very exciting to be here at the Baker Nord Center for Humanities and to have met so many of you all who are involved in very interesting academic and administrative creative projects. I've learned so much about the university since I've been here, and actually have found a very warm welcome in this very lovely place. This, what I am doing today is reading a bit from my book, Interspecies Ethics, and in particular the part called Meditations on Cosmopolitanism. Philosophy begins in wonder. Wandering along a stream in Gombe National Park in Tanzania, anthropologist Barbara Smuts was following the usual path to the sleeping trees. Smuts has often made sojourns to study primate social behavior, and she had already documented the social manners encountered among her baboon friends in the African parks. On this particular occasion, however, something strange happened. The wild troop of baboons did not proceed forward at their typical pace, but instead paused and sat motionless by the stream's still pools for moments of silent contemplation. She writes, without any signal perceptible to me, each baboon sat at the edge of a pool on one of the many smooth rocks that lined the edges of the stream. They sat alone or in small clusters, completely silent, gazing at the water. Half an hour later, again with no perceptible signal, they resumed their journey in what felt like an almost sacramental procession, searching for some word to give to this astonishing posture of reverence among the monkeys. Smuts settles on the Buddhist term for a spiritual community, Sangha. I was stunned by this mysterious expression of what I have come to think of as baboon Sangha, she writes. Any interspecies ethics could do well to flip the claim of human exceptionalism several times on its head. Before entertaining a claim to naturalize human beings, and here with the risk of a more reductive model of biology, an enchanted nature merits some degree of meditation. The usual lineup of metaphysical suspects for shoring up human superiority, reason, moral freedom, self-awareness, have been used to gravely overstate our human capacities while obscuring genuinely mind-bending powers that cross species barriers. If there is a common path for ethical and spiritual enlightenment as an alternative to humanism's rational enlightenment, it does not seem to originate in any cross-species capacity for high-level reason, but in an affect-laden, emotional intelligence instead. Humans and other animals have a range of capacities for ordinary ethical engagements. These engagements occur typically in everyday interactions and through the not so much through the conscious application of abstract moral principles or rational rules, but more as a kind of ongoing tacit negotiation of the modes of reciprocity and the social norms that are required to maintain groups and communities. Hence, ordinary communication-based ethics does not rely on the normative features, for example, the abstract rules of modern institutions and states as defended in the great moral traditions of Kant or John Stuart Mill. While humans are armed with a range of rational laws, or perhaps I should say rational laws, not just democratic, but also fascist and neoliberal, it is not clear if these laws have raised us above other social animals with regard to fairness and the treatment of others. Our lauded reason has been viewed as our great hope against evil. However, for thousands of years, one man's reasoning, whether Plato's or Marx, strikes his rivals as a ruse of power, and once again, reason falls short of bringing any real peace to the world. Yet we humans have more than one trick up our ethical sleeves. And as it turns out, so do other animal species. Social carnivores, crows, dolphins, elephants, the great apes, and even monkeys display expectations, desires, and tensions. And as we shall see, some funny fetishes that not only sustain the group they depend on to survive, but that generate some surprisingly expansive social interactions as well. Consider the sexual politics of bonobos. The bonobo policy of substituting sex for aggression renders them, in Frans de Waal's phrase, the hippie apes. Yeah, they make love, not war. This sexy social policy may not serve as a formula for transspecies peace, but it does not hurt to wonder what other worldly practices for peacemaking might be cultivated between us and other species. We humans have been quick to point out the cognitive limitations of non-human creatures in view of our own big brain achievements. We've insisted that other animals' cognitive processes lack the advantages of linguistic signs and are restricted to a loose stream of affect We forget, however, that as a species, we humans, at least since the time of Aristophanes' Lysistrata, may be lagging somewhat behind on playful peacemaking skills, at least by bonobo standards. The peaceful reflections of the baboons at the African streams' still pools offer intriguing hints of what may be a more widely shared experience of enlightened repose. The still waters seem to unlock for these primates a sacred experience of unity with nature. And not unlike what may be found in the meditative practices of Buddhists and other spiritual communities. Of course, these spiritual experiences are rarely an everyday practice for any group of animals, human or not. But they do suggest animal capacities for transposing ordinary life into a dream of cosmic peace. Such a dream of peace would be fragile at best, and by ordinary standards would strike anyone as a bit mad. And it should. Animal species cannot survive without preying on other living species, and will resort to murderous territorial rages, even against their own kin. But what if such madness, and here I mean the cosmic dream, the dream of peace, not the territorial rages, what if such madness is a more common experience than one would first think? Of course, it is also true that madness has many manifestations, some admirable in their own way, some more ambiguous. Svante Pabo, the world-renowned head of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, suspects that a certain kind of madness is a uniquely human trait, a trait that accounts for extraordinary feats of technological and planetary domination. Pabo has speculated that for some 45,000 years, we humans have been propelled by a Faustian madness. Indeed, he writes that modern hominids became the only primate who dared cross open water. Could the serene reflections by the African pools open another path, a path for another kind of madness? This time, one that is not exceptionally human nor bent on domination. Countering an impulse to dominate, this peace by the water echoes the contemplative features of a madness once upon a time called divine. Divine madness. Plato's Symposium and Phaedrus are among ancient philosophical dialogues devoted to the role of madness in ethical and spiritual vision. Asking the question, what is love, or eros? The Symposium offers not final answers, but seductive fragments of a myth that Socrates learns from a priestess and a mystic named Diotima. In the Phaedrus, Socrates and an interlocutor sit by a stream to ponder the nature of the soul inspired by their divine madness. Divine madness is said by Plato to compel the seeker of wisdom to suspend ordinary pleasure and passions, all portrayed for his students as sexual, erratic, and debasing. The slavish love of isolated cases of youthful or human beauty, he writes. In Plato's divine madness, the seeker finds instead a spiritualization of erotic passion, a tranquil counterpart to Dionysian frenzy and Buddhist Tantra. This higher love, this eros, takes one by surprise as an experience of overpowering, not this time through the sexual allure of another body, but through the deep stillness of the vast sea of beauty that every other beautiful object somehow partakes of, as the mystic priestess reveals to an unknowing Socrates. Philosophical reflection, transcending ordinary passions, can occur in a restful pose by a stream or a sea, as Plato teaches us, where near magical glimpses into cosmic tranquility are found. Could the pause of the baboons by the running waters of the African stream offer for these primates some similar vision of cosmic peace? And if so, wouldn't this heightened ethical vision be grounded not in any cognitive or linguistic skill peculiar to the superior primates, but on a common plane of an elevated affect, a plane that monkeys and humans might share with a range of other creatures? Impartial reason is a uniquely human capacity proposed to account for how ethics might be extended beyond our friends, beyond kinship, to embrace through cold moral logic the stranger. Kantians require rational duty to provide the moral ground for a cosmopolitan peace, which Tom Regan argues may include those less advanced species if we think that they might be the subject of a life and thus worthy of human respect. Peter Singer calculates that a rational concern based on abstract utilitarian rules could be expanded to include the interests of subhuman animals as well as to strangers and outsiders. The underlying hypothesis of these modern moral theorists is that humans are unique. We are unique among other animals in the capacity to make decisions apart from the biases of ordinary consciousness and our usual sentiments. Only through this unique capacity for cold reason can the human, as a unique animal among animals, cultivate a calm regard for strangers. Yet recent science and critical theory cast doubt on any moral capacity for decision-making that is metaphysically free from affects, emotions, cultural norms, and social beliefs. Affects, including those nasty biases born of in-group, out-group social dynamics, shape decisions, including the judgments that we make about the moral worth of others. Warped social fields, for good and for bad, curve the waves of affect upon which our individual selves, with our powers of reason, speech, and imagination, swim. Ordinarily, like other social animals, we help our own, harm our enemies, and ignore others. Still, our common animal status is nothing to be ignored, not if it holds open paths for enlightenment. Barbara Smuts' discovery of Sangha among her baboon friends conjures an enchanted world where fellow creatures might cross over species lines to ponder together. Monkey brains might not be capable of grasping an abstract concept of the sacred, let alone of elaborating any philosophical system of moral or theological thought. The capacity for highly abstract and systematic thinking may indeed be unique to modern, technologically driven humans. But a phenomenological approach suggests that the tranquil or ecstatic heights of spiritual states and enlightenment are not experienced as conceptual anyway. In fact, as practitioners of yoga, meditation, or simple prayer know, too much thinking can block the practitioner from the experience of a spiritual core. A sacred place or practice frees the mind of everyday concerns and weighty abstractions, opening the psyche to elevated feelings of wonder or awe. The boundless uplift of these feelings may be prompted by witnessing natural wonders from the starry sky above, as Kant attests, or, as for Thoreau, the uncertain depths of Walden Pond. Verticality is the vector of mystery and reverence, Anthony Steinbach explains in his phenomenological study of religious epiphanies and mysticism. Our question here is whether these mystical heights of ethical and spiritual enlightenment could be attained not just by humans, but also by a significant range of other species. If the upper dimension of the vertical vector includes experiences of the divine, then the bottom end of this vector includes the obverse of the divine, the disgusting and the ridiculous. Some tentative field research suggests that animals do experience that upper level, as in the spiritual immersion evoked by the stream's still pools. Even more so, it is clear that animals partake in the lower aspect of the vertical vector. Verticality from the bottom up, or human disgust with animality, and animal disgust with humans. Disgust is a potent emotion with some redeeming moral and political value within and across species. Disgust typically evokes a visceral response, nausea. It may be directed against vomit, parasites, necrophilia, and whatever else is indigestible, untouchable, or otherwise unpalatable. It provokes expulsion of the irritant or withdrawal from it. The social representation of others as not just a class below, but as lower than the low, triggers the politics of disgust, resulting in expulsion or in genocide. But the target of just can also be enjoyed as oddly amusing and comical as occurs with a dirty joke or otherwise a nasty or humorous attack on another. In this context, laughter at the disgusting target sometimes promotes the social body, just as we now know that laughter bolsters our individual immune systems. A problematic politics of disgust can be found everywhere, not only against ethnic communities, but also in the treatment of other animals. Animal torture in factory farms, concentration camps, is not in the end different from any other banal evil that so-called good people carry out through a toxic brew of self-interest and misplaced disgust. Misplaced disgust, disgust not for the cruelty of the torture, which would put to good use this morally and politically charged emotion, but for torture's victims. This spiraling downward dynamic from a heinous practice to that practice's victim illustrates one common outcome of what psychologist Paul Rosen describes more broadly as the slippery logic of disgust. It seems to be psychologically difficult to escape this downward sweep, that is, displacing disgust from a heinous practice to its victims. But as Rosen argues, the social target of the emotion is not at all fixed. It can change across individuals, cultures, and groups. Disgust's slippery logic is not hard to explain in scientific terms. What we call disgust operates as an emotion with social and ethical implications. Such emotions are understood to have a cognitive component that renders them more than an immediate reaction to an external stimulus and subject to some degree of learning and cultural modification. Given the need for animals to adapt to local dietary niches and cultures, it makes sense to assume that their disgust responses would be triggered by their culture's norms and adaptive taboos. And to be sure, scientists are discovering a surprising number of cognitively advanced emotions in other animal species. Indeed, these domestic animals, including chickens, pigs, and cows, maintained under and slaughtered under disgusting conditions, show every sign of possessing capacities to struggle for their freedom, to think intelligently, to enjoy interspecies companionships, and also for some feelings of disgust of their own. Darwin classified disgust as one of the 6 basic human emotions expressed across cultures through facial interactions. More recently, researchers have documented disgust in a number of species. Yet while disgust is displayed across some parts of the animal kingdom, only one species, the human, is said to experience this emotion common to animals as a revulsion toward a common animality. The representation of human disgust as naturally targeted toward animality is a prevailing view of modern psychology. This bias against animals is so strong that even Martha Nussbaum, who appeals to human compassion in advocating for laws against animal abuse, reasserts without critical examination the claims that disgust is all about animals and animal products, and that the motivating idea has to do with our interest in policing the boundary between ourselves as humans and non-human others, or the abject. One has to wonder, do non-human animals experience disgust as a compulsion to police some similar boundary of animality? Surely it couldn't be that the disgust experienced by other animals is directed on occasion toward the human, or could it be? In addressing these questions, we might consider whether even the best of us could, at times, be a bit confused. It is true that the metaphoric use of the term animal is relevant for understanding and analyzing modern human triggers of disgust. But perhaps disgust's real target is not animality per se, but whatever our experiences lead us to perceive as nasty and dirty stuff. Purifying rituals such as washing with water and grooming or separation function to stave off sources of contagion and to protect life against harmful germs, parasites, and toxins. These purifying or grooming practices, as anthropologists suggest, also function to provide a sense of shared identity and to cement in-group bonds, often through separation from an outcast. And now there is an emerging body of research on the emotion of disgust and separation rituals in other animals, including an animal we might think to be one of the most disgusting, namely rats. Yet even for rats, disgust sometimes takes on some pretty fascinating social functions. Consider how plastic disgust is. The scientist J. Faust explores one seemingly natural target of disgust in the scent of death, which rats share with humans, and uncovers the malleability of a richly complex social emotion. Typically, rats do exhibit the expected disgust response of withdrawal from any whiff of mortality. However, the target of rat disgust is not fixed. And as J. Faust discovered when he painted estrus females with a synthetic form of the death smell, virgin males exposed to the nauseating chemical mix eventually learned to get used to it, and indeed bed these same females. The real surprise, however, came in the second stage of the experiment with these same rats. Males who were exposed to this cocktail of sex and death later expressed a preference for death-scented mates over so-called normal ones. So much for any assumption that death, or at least death's effects of decay, degeneration, are the unalterable roots of disgust. Given the biosocial eccentricities of cultures, in this case the culture of modern laboratory rats, one has to wonder, what is desire without a fetish? In general, the functions of social and cultural practices are multivalent and ambiguous, and their biosocial meanings can vary widely across individuals and groups. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt underscores what he believes to be the unique significance of cleanliness for human culture when he invites us, as he writes, to imagine visiting a town where people wear no clothes, never bathe, have sex doggy style in public, and eat meat by biting off pieces directly from the carcass. In this imaginary town, the temples have gone to the dogs, he remarks. A problem with this picture is not only that there are humans for whom this hypothetical is more utopian than dystopian. The ancient cynics seem to be happy with the living the imagined life of the dog, dirt and all. But the average dog seems to have a sense of disgust of her own. Doggy-style sex apparently is not a problem, I suppose, for dogs. But cold, wet human hands on doggy fur is, or at least reportedly can be, a real turnoff. The disgust expressed by other species may be directed, at least on occasion, not at animality per se, but at the cold, wet human. So there goes any easy assumptions regarding universal human disgust with animality, but also recalling the dog's perspective on cold, wet human hands, any weighty abstraction about the sacred properties of water. Visceral conscience and the gut brain. As a social emotion, disgust can take on useful ethical overtones despite its lowly origins, forming what we might call the visceral conscience, and relate explicitly to moral phenomena such as shame. In the context of weighing the pros and cons of vegan and vegetarian lifestyles, Donna Haraway suggests, intriguingly, that some degree of indigestion after eating meat might well tap into a gut-level register of disgust. This visceral register may serve well to prompt carnivores to question whether their dietary habits can ever be unambiguously right and morally clean. Dyspepsia, she adds, might appropriately accompany other morally problematic behaviors. She suggests laboratory research practiced on non-human animals. If so, then perhaps the thick neuron concentration around the digestive tract, comprising what psychologists term the gut brain, might account for a role for dyspepsia in ethics. This second brain, largely independent of immediate voluntary control, can trigger anxiety in the head brain in response to infections and other disturbances of the body, and alter mood and individual behavior. But as psychologist Elizabeth Wilson explains in her study of depression, the gut can also respond directly to social encounters, registering the ups and downs of social relationships or prompting responses to social situations. Citing new research on the enteric nervous system, she suggests that the gut brain is a vital organ in the maintenance of our relations with others. Maybe indigestion and digestion are not just metaphors for internalization. Perhaps they are actual mechanisms for relating to others. That is, perhaps gut pathology is another form of perturbed relation to others. Here I take the speculation on psychosomatic malaise a step further. Consider the gut-wrenching feeling of not being able to stomach some act or event, such as harming another animal. Visceral responses to complex social situations seem to register ethical reactions. Indeed, in situations where our head brain may press us to action, our gut brain may register deep down moral reservations. And now Frans de Waal and his associates have found that our closest cousins, the chimpanzees, can also experience these visceral reservations as shame. Modern moral theorists assert that the achievement of the moral conscience as a capacity to feel guilt for personal failures before abstract moral laws is the culmination of modern society. The queasiness that accompanies shame, however, may indicate a viscerally rooted conscience based on norms and ideals that are significantly shared with other social animals. Nothing is more telling than how we react after a transgression, Frans de Waal writes, as he explains that chimpanzees express the prototype for shame-like behavior, as do human primates. They lower their face and clearly want to sink into the ground. For chimpanzees, this may mean literally crawling in the dirt. When an individual chimpanzee violates a social norm, we often see her make vigorous attempts to reconcile, holding out hands, approaching the other individual, grooming, so on. The moral register of indigestion reminds us, down deep, that even the most systematic cases of rational justification by creatures who are, as psychoanalysts and empirical psychologists agree, constitutionally ignorant of themselves and awesome confabulators, can hardly guarantee the moral purity of a rational decision. Shame and moral disgust share a visceral component that could well function in transpecies ethics. Could pigs, every bit as smart as dogs, be morally disgusted with the shameful hands they have encountered at the slaughter? It doesn't seem all that far-fetched to assume that any number of social animals might share with humans the ethical capacities of the second brain. So thus far, I've aimed to establish that humans share some common ground with other species on the vertical vector, at least at the bottom end. In this next section, we ascend with Plato's diatema to the vertical heights, but this time alongside other animal species. imminent transcendence, and moral symbol. Jane Goodall suspects that the ecstatic dances of African chimpanzees, occasioned by waterfalls and violent gusts of wind, may be stimulated by feelings akin to wonder and awe. Michael Tobias witnesses imminent spirituality swimming in the ocean among whale sharks. These sharks exhibit bliss, the ultimate state of meditation, he explains, an indwelling referred to by such luminaries as Buddha and Thoreau. The baboons in Gombe National Park display signs of reverence and awe in their communion at the still pools that Smuts discovered. Smuts also finds a spiritual connection similar to Baboon Sangal with her dog, and a respite from a game of fetched played by a stream where her dog caught Smuts' gaze and elevated her melancholic mood. Smuts writes, "She held her position and my gaze for almost 20 minutes and then quietly approached and lay down next to me. My dark mood vanished. This was my first lesson in meditation." These and other species too seem to experience a sense of beauty or of the sublime in nature that is spiritual. Whether an experience of the sublime or the beautiful can achieve an ethical character for these non-human species requires yet more speculation. Yet this speculation is not without some basis. Consider acts of compassion witnessed in other species. The alpha male chimpanzee, named Freddie, in Disney Nature's 2012 documentary film, Chimpanzee, adopts a starving orphan named Oscar who has been rejected by the rest of the community. Surely, this is an act of moral beauty. Even more of a wonder is a story of a bonobo in a London zoo who assists a bird who lands in her cage, whom she is destined never to see again, to a freedom that she herself will never know. As de Waal tells the story, the bonobo picked up the starling with one hand and climbed to the highest point of the highest tree, where she wrapped her legs around the trunk so that she had both hands free to hold the bird. She then carefully unfolded its wings and spread them open, one wing in each hand, before throwing the bird as far as she could. For de Waal, this bonobo's act seems to display the highest type of empathy, indicating that she possesses what is called a theory of mind. But perhaps rather than an abstract concept or theory of the bird's mental thoughts, the drive for freedom here is expressed symbolically in the unfolded wings of the bird in flight. Perhaps it's those wings that spur the bonobo's compassion. More than a cold exercise in abstraction or theory and concept-guided empathy, this compassion may be symbol-driven and truly sublime. Recall that symbols operate between the sensory and conceptual realms, offering intelligible meaning that is not fixed by well-defined concepts. Then here we have a symbol-guided compassion, perhaps the basis for the highest stage of morality, without the need for determinant, that is, concept or law-based judgments. Vivid symbol and not dry concept may guide an unexpected and elevated response to the stranger. Jonathan Haidt explains the psychological basis for moral beauty in terms of heightened sentiments experienced upon witnessing an act of kindness. This experience of moral beauty results from an activated vagus nerve in the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms and undoes the arousal activated by the sympathetic or the fight, flight. system. The vagus nerve works with the hormone oxytocin to create feelings of calmness, love, and desire for contact that encourage bonding and attachment, all understood to be very significant for mothers and their children. Freddie's adoption of young Oscar seems to engage similarly generous impulses, promoting attachment. The bonobos' concern for the bird, however, does not rest on any expectation for intimate attachment or friendship's eventual reciprocities. This act of compassion suggests a capacity for generosity that is unbound by any normal interest or attachment desire of any kind. Modern moral theory treats this capacity as a pure form of altruism, but more can be said. The sacrifice for a stranger bears the spiritual overtones of Christian agape or Buddhist karuna. Here is an unbound connectivity that is receptive and non-judgmental. Ethical comportment no longer depends on membership in a particular community or society and on expectations for social reciprocity. Is this what the baboons find reflected back at them from the still pool? For baboons, chimpanzees, orcas, elephants, and dogs, is water a spiritual or even an ethical symbol? Closing remarks, baboons in a green world. I felt like I was turning into a baboon. I had gone from thinking about the world analytically to experiencing the world directly and intuitively. It was then that something long slumbering awoke inside me, a yearning to be in the world as my ancestors had done, as all creatures were designed to do by eons of evolution, Barbara Smuts writes. Wouldn't it be funny if the ability to immerse oneself in the flow of life, that is, to live for a moment fully in the waves of the present, a state thought to determine animal modes of awareness as inferior to human consciousness, is in fact not the lowest stage of consciousness, but the highest. Narcissus looked into a pool and saw an image of the self. The baboon sitting along the stream in Sangha may for a moment lose the self rather than find it. In the stillness of that moment may be found not nothing, but wonders unfold. All things are full of gods, Thales is reported to have taught. Perhaps the font of time that adventurers cross open waters in search of, the source for the re-enchantment of our ordinary lives, is not lost in some far distant past or impossible future, but ever recurring in the depths of the moment, not above our human animality, but running through it, like water. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And you're agreeable to take some questions if there are any?
Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'll try to repeat them so that everyone can hear.
I have some difficulty finding a benevolent affinity between disgust and ethics. Traditionally, people have been disgusted by homosexuality, they've been disgusted by interracial marriage, they have been elated by torture and lynching. There's a 20th century tradition talking about disgust being the basis of morality, and Patrick Devlin, who's a well-known mid-century writer. And I don't understand why I think the connection is pernicious. So I don't understand why if someone is disgusted by something that is benevolent and elated by something that ought to be considered evil, that we should respect these visceral feelings. I thought the whole purpose of ethics was to judge them by some other standard, whether it's some humanity standard or equality standard or autonomy standard or
Yes,
some other
yes.
standard. And I think what you've done is put us back with the lynch mobs.
And the monkeys, yeah. Yeah, no, that's an important question. Yeah, it's an important question. So let me repeat it. So the question is, are not those visceral emotions like disgust, which can be aimed at homosexuality, has been, or even pleasure, erotic drives, which can be aimed at torture or abuse, how could those kind of visceral emotions be in any way reliable emotions for any kind of ethics? And indeed, is not reason or some of our laws, our moral laws, our ideas of autonomy and of, let's see, and you may have mentioned other, are those not protection against those kind of reactions that we may find prompted to through our more visceral responses? And yeah, that's a very important, very, very important question. Yes, so my response is two-pronged here. On the one hand, our reason, our moral laws, our ideas of autonomy, they too can be abused. And they too have been. So our reason, let's say, our attempt to carefully judge others through an informed process itself seems to be inextricably bound up with emotions, to the point where neuroscientists and psychologists believe that we cannot even, they argue it's clear we cannot make decisions apart from emotions. And not just emotions, but memories, affects, what psychologists call implicit biases, part of the habits of our thinking, cannot be stripped away entirely and leave bare judgment alone. So judgment, moral judgment is not useless. I would never say that. Autonomy, relying upon our ability to think clearly is not useless, it's important, but it's not reliable. It's not enough. That's my only claim. Not to exclude, but to emphasize the ways in which it has not been reliable so that we don't overemphasize its importance and therefore underplay the ways in which our ethics, a lot of what we understand of ethics, the crucial role of social emotions are something that, for example, are not just important for humans, but explain some continuity with other species. So now to go the other direction towards social emotions, that those social emotions I would never argue, including the emotion of disgust, as reliable by itself. I would never argue that any of our capacities for ethics are reliable all by itself, that you could pick one out and create a whole systematic moral philosophy based on it alone. I would never argue that. So yes, those emotions too are not reliable. But nonetheless, what is interesting about those emotions, including disgust, is, for one thing, they too, like our conceptions of our autonomous self, like conceptions of our, like judgment, are informed by culture. They are informed by culture and cognition, and they are learned, and they are plastic. So what fascinates me here is that disgust is, it may be that it is so much a part of us that we will never, I don't know of anyone who's ever been able to rid it from their psyche, not feeling disgust, yuck emotions, that yuck feeling, towards something. You can all think of something that you think is nasty and dirty, and it's like you just don't want to touch it, smell it, come close to it. We have that, it's built in, but it turns out that that is very plastic. There's not just this natural object of disgust, which, for example, some of the homophobic propaganda turns on. There's not that, and that instead it's something that is very much learned, and it alters, it changes in accord to what we think or what we feel, what we experience is holding ourselves and communities together. So that's my response to that question. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a little support for that, because I think Joe's question, or Joe's concern is very relevant. Disgust is a precursor to genocide and such an antisocial emotion.
Yes.
But I agree with you that we may have to work with it. We've done, I think, 5 studies with different populations, and we find that disgust is related to how much empathy people have. So if you're more psychopathic, you don't feel disgust very much. And if you have more empathetic concern, then you feel disgust more. And that variable of empathetic concern seems to be the one that psychology identifies as the most tightly tied to behaving ethically. So I'm inclined to think you're right that we're going to have to work on shaping these emotions, which don't have any concrete basis, rather than push them away from that.
And with awareness of the history, that terrible history of the ways in which disgust has perpetuated holocausts and so on. But yeah, we have to shape that. But it's interesting then if disgust, yeah, I didn't know that, because if disgust is something not felt by sociopaths who are missing some of those social emotions, shame and other social emotions too, that yeah, it's interesting if shame and disgust are interconnected together along with perhaps also empathy, capacities for empathy. So perhaps those social emotions can feed on each other, enrichen each other. Yes?
I was wondering how you might respond to somebody saying that we don't actually have a definition of species, either biologically or
Yes.
or just that there's so much variation and disagreement concerning species that to talk about crossing species boundaries or interspecies seems almost the wrong place to start. And it seems to me, I mean, I can conceive of somebody else who is human as part of a different species, as subhuman. So it seems that our different conceptions of species are, they arise from moral concern. They almost, we demarcate ourselves from something else because we have less moral concern for it. The species seems to have more of a sociological and moral worth to it than talking about something species biologically and how different species biologically might be ethical to each other.
Yeah, so the question, excuse me, is does that notion even of species function as a marker of an in-group, as a way in which we exclude others from belonging to ourselves? So what is the value of that notion of species? And to that I could add, there are questions like that, ethical questions and biological questions. Humans are now thought of as being not maybe just part of a species, but a quasi-species. So the use of that notion of quasi is meant to redirect us to the fact that we humans are ourselves mixes of other species all the way down to our guts. So biologically, it's more complex. We're part of other species too, and complicated bioregions where different species are part of our in a parasitic way or symbiotic way or through coevolution. They are part of, if you like, that group that we are. So there's that more biological direction to respond. And there is the ethical question too, yeah. And that's the radical question of, yeah, why even fix on that notion of species when, it turns out we have genomes of other creatures. We have genomes of Neanderthal in us. We have genomes. We have other creatures mixed with us. I wouldn't wash out biological differences altogether either. But yeah, that there may be more porous boundaries than we had thought. Yeah, I think that's. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, now I'm going to have problems hearing. Let me get back.
How does research like yours possibly help to influence practice in culture? For example, changing things in animal husbandry or animal experimentation?
So the question is, how does philosophical thought make a difference? And in this case, does this kind of project, a philosophical ethics that is multi-species or even interspecies, does that make any kind of difference? It's not, I don't see philosophy or this particular project of philosophy as itself bound to a certain sphere or discipline. It's part of a project, a movement, where many people participate in many different ways. So that this work, is itself not just mine, but there are parts of it co-authored by other scholars, including parts of it that really write from primatologists. So it's already there, something of a, not interspecies project exactly, but many people have written some, the words in it from many different disciplines. But those people are themselves part of a larger movement where the impact is to change the way in which we understand animals and ourselves as another species, or quasi-species alongside them. So by itself, what can change anything by itself? But as part of that wave of some larger cultural change, I think important. It could be, that larger wave could be important, very important, and especially as it's supported by these, by so many in fields of different fields of the sciences. So that would be how you'd hope, at least. Yeah, and let's see, your hand, I believe, is up.
I was just wondering, in that vein, if you think that there if we can maybe start thinking about ecological ethics in the broadest possible sense. I mean, it seems to me that this kind of philosophy is deeply in line with trends in eco-criticism, for example, or thinking about biopolitics in alternative terms. So I just wondered if you could speak to that.
That this kind of research is, it is part of, many different things happening in ecological studies, animal studies, and some studies that are the post-Foucauldian biopower, some studies there too. Here I am looking at, in my own interests, are looking at specifically at ethics and at agency in ethics. So I'm interested in emphasizing how humans are agents and how other animals can also be actual agents in an ethical sense, not just suffering, not just suffering, and sentient, but actual agents. And agents in an ethical sense, by which I mean, well, now what counts as ethics? If it's more than just, let's say, some notion of autonomy or some notion of having a categorical thought, moral laws, if it is centered around social emotions, then that centering around social emotions becomes, for me, what distinguishes it from some ways into this topic through biopolitics, but not others, okay? So I'm not as much interested in how anything can be an agent, a thing can be an agent, but I'm interested specifically in ethical agency, notions of responsibility, how responsibility is played out in other species. So species transgress, other animals transgress within their own troop, for example, within their own communities, and they get punished for it. they get shamed for it. They may get exiled. That fascinates me. Power dynamics, that none of this ethics happens in free from from power and technology. That fascinates me. That animals have technology, that they think instrumentally is sometimes how it's put. They can objectify that somehow. It's that there are power dynamics, and that we and they together are part of larger biotechnological processes that are happening, where again we may float on a wave. We're not autonomous or fully autonomous creatures. So that interests me, the larger power dynamics. Now, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So in this vision that you're talking about, that might have a practical element.
Yes.
So in this future, would you imagine there being farm animals involved in that or not?
Yes. Yes.
How would that happen?
That farm animals too, right? That pigs too, for example, or cows too, for example. First of all, acknowledging that they too have these social emotions, intelligence. They can have a strong sense of what we would call family, of what we would call friendship, and that these are vital to who they are, not just a concern for them not experiencing pain, but their larger social life. And that these animals interact. I've lived on a farm when I was young. You interact with pigs like dogs, and they communicate. You can communicate back and forth. So so that there's a sense in which you can learn from them about their own conditions for flourishing. Not verbally, but through other ways in which, like as we sense with our infant children, are people that we, how they feel in a certain situation, whether or not they're doing well. For example, I don't like that analogy exactly because they're adult animals. We're talking about mature animals, but that there are means of, alternative means of communication. Does that?
But they're adult animals on the way to the slaughter.
I'm sorry, they're what now?
They're adult animals on the way to the slaughter.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in hearing how that would work.
Well, I mean, they're as brutalized on the way to the slaughter. Yeah, and what aspect of?
They live perfectly happy, happily. I'm just saying, in the this is a broad philosophical conversation. We hear, of course, all sorts of things. Is it possible for there to be a responsible, meat-producing, egg-producing future in here?
Oh, okay, that's a complex question. Yeah.
From the philosophical, ecological,
Practical. I mean, maybe with a movement towards synthetic meat, but it's difficult. With the kind of production of meat we have now, I don't see it.
even if they live, as they say, perfectly happy life.
Okay. And so, is that question more about killing them, or more about? I mean, because I do.
Do you see that raising animals to kill could
Domesticated animals.
an ethical thing to do? I mean, there were multiple camps out there. I'm wondering.
Yeah. Oh, and which camp I'm on? Well, first of all, as someone who does ethics, I would not think that one person would have the right answer. I think that discussion has to happen in different communities with their different cultures. And so to understand what becomes of domesticated animals, since, all the problems, if you have them, they're raised to be, they're evolved to be domesticated animals. If you get rid of them, you've murdered them. So what happens? So there are all kinds of issues there, and how that works, I think, has to vary with a particular culture. But it has to take into account that whole social dimension, that horizontal. I looked at the vertical today, but the horizontal dimension of those animal lives. And the fact that just killing them is not just killing them, that they too seem to have a sense of death. Various species have grieving over death. They remember death. So all of that is also part of who they are. So all of that has to come in to play. Yeah. But do I think we could have finally also a clean utopian world where there would be no predatory behavior? No. Do I think human beings are unique among all animals because only we can choose to live or at least among predatory animals, to live a clean life? No, I don't believe in that kind of morally clean, pure, or rigid way of thinking even. That rigidity scares me. Yeah.
You think something like the Heifer Project then is someone that's doing the work? Are you familiar with the Heifer Project?
Is that the synthetic meat project? Oh, okay.
So you give goats and things to people, disadvantaged people around the world.
Right. Yeah.
That's okay. It's not something that you have.
Yeah, it's like on a scale of evil, you know, I mean, it's to balance all the factors, all the ways in which harm happens. It makes it a complex decision. So only I would say there's no one simple way out of those kind of complicated problems. But
I don't want to cut off the conversation. I just want to invite you all to continue it in a different venue. That would be downstairs, where we have some refreshment to re-energize yourselves and our speaker. I also wanted to invite you, if you are not on our mailing list and you would like to be, to fill out one of the forms that you got when you came in. And then before we adjourn downstairs, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking Professor Willett for such a wonderful presentation and spirit with the Issa lecture series. Thank you very much.
thank you all. Thank you for coming.